Ever find yourself waiting endlessly at a big box pharmacy, feeling like just another number? At Tablet Pharmacy, they provide the personalized service you deserve. They offer free delivery and blister packaging options to make managing your medications easier than ever. Check their competitive prices online at tabletpharmacy.ca.
Welcome, friends. I am Cindy Thompson, and this is a Resilience Project. This is a space where stories are shared and possibilities are discovered. I invite you to partner with me in cultivating resilience among humans, one conversation at a time. In this episode, we are talking with Dr. Kirk Austin about his new book titled Buoyancy, Building Resilient Kids. Tapping into a wealth of experience working with complex trauma in children and youth, Dr. Austin dives into how we can help our kids better understand their emotions, the physiological responses that are connected to stress, and strategies for growing their resilience. Building on the acronym BREATHE, Dr. Austin dissects the 7 key elements to human buoyancy identified in his book. If you are a parent, caregiver, teacher, or grandparent, this episode is full of helpful information. Dr. Kirk Austin is a registered clinical counselor in the province of British Columbia, Canada. He is actively involved in training foster parents, psychotherapists, social workers, and educators in building resilience in vulnerable children and youth. He received his undergraduate degree in psychology from Trinity Western University before completing his Master's of Arts in Counseling Psychology at Liberty University. Prior to earning his doctorate in the field of positive psychology at the University of South Africa, he completed a diploma in adult education in Vancouver Community College. He currently works in psychosocial oncology at the BC Cancer Agency and has served as training director of complex trauma resources since 2012. Kirk, I am just so pleased that you're here to spend a bit of time and in conversation share what you've been up to. I think about 2020, a lot of people are going to look back and say, what did you do during 2020? What was that year like for you? And everybody's going to have a story about that. Mm-hmm. But you got busy and wrote a book during 2020.
Yes, I did. Thank you very much for having me, by the way. It's very nice to be here.
I love it. And it's really cool to discover that we know a lot of people in common from the mainland and BC here have worked with some very similar faces. And it's neat to hear that we come from a similar background.
Yeah.
Before we get into the book, can we go back a little bit to help our listeners understand a bit more about what took you into this particular field that you have found yourself in? And what is it about working with this population that attracted you? And what took you in to do your PhD in positive psychology? It's a loaded question.
Very loaded questions. Well, I, as a young man, thought I thought psychology would be a degree that would prepare me for the best that life could offer. And so I ended up doing an undergraduate degree at a small university in Western Canada called Trinity Western University. And I thought at the end of my degree, I would be fully equipped to deal with kind of the young offender set. And within the first month or two, I just got the stuffing kicked out of me from kind of the abusive behaviors that kids could give. And I found that I was far overmatched. And so I ended up going back and doing a master's degree in counseling, fully thinking that I was then equipped to work with kind of the conduct disorder, oppositional defiant disorder youth. And I worked for a very creative program that had focused on attachment theory. It was a program run by Salvation Army in partnership with government stakeholders and school districts. And we had really creative things going on, like outdoor camping and educators educating in very creative ways. And I was the family therapist. And one of the things that I recall in the very first part of my working there was we had a 1-to-1 staff ratio to kids. And within the first month of working there, we introduced one existing kid, probably 14, to a brand new kid. And we wanted them to feel comfortable coming into the program. And so we thought we would play basketball in the gym that we had on the property. And As I was playing basketball, guarding the other staff member, we heard a noise. We turned around, and these two boys, having just met each other, were in a fist fight. And so we did what we could. We separated them, and we did a kind of a critical incident debrief. And the question was, so what happened? And both boys said the same thing. He looked at me. He looked at me. And what I realized that when each of these boys said he looked at me, they were actually conveying something far bigger. A look meant something. They interpreted the look, and they then went into a typical behavior of survival. And so it was fight, flight, or freeze, and their preferred mode of protection was the fight. I ended up working with a psychologist by the name of Chuck Geddes at the time. He was the psychologist on staff. And when the program kind of migrated on, I went on and did some other studies. I ended up moving towards a doctoral degree and focusing on positive psychology. And my topic was actually something called salutogenesis.
Interesting.
Funky title.
Yes.
It's actually on my dissertation. And what it was looking at the origin of health. That's what salutogenesis means. And so I started studying what makes life worth living rather than looking at the toxicity of things like anxiety and depression. Well, I ended up running back into Dr. Geddes back in 2012. And we got talking about what we were doing. And he was working on the cutting edge of resiliency with the same kids that we had started with. And there were some theorists at the time that were studying neuroplasticity and complex trauma. So I ended up joining him in 2012 and wrote an academic white paper, and then we wrote some curriculum. And then I started doing training around the province of British Columbia on helping kids find resilience from the toxic backstories that they had come from. I think Karen Purvis used to call them kids coming from hard places. And that was the audience that I ended up kind of sitting with. And at the same time, I started working with BC Cancer in a field called psychosocial oncology. And so these are people who are diagnosed with and treated for cancer, and started to look at how to integrate resilience within that population, because people are knocked down. They have to find a way of getting back up.
Right.
And so that's where I ended up kind of migrating my way through the world of working with both kids and adults.
It sounds like a great balance, just the meaning that you are bringing to helping those who are struggling at a very vulnerable time as adults with cancer, but also being able to have an influence in supporting the people who are also working with those kids, to train people, to help them understand what maybe some of these behaviors might bring and what they're about.
I have just a very rewarding professional life. I carry several portfolios, and each of them offers a little bit different of a focus using psychology. And I really enjoy all of the things that I do.
So are there any insights that you might be able to share with our listeners when you think about that example with the kids who got in the fist fight? If people are out there who might be worried about their teen, worried about what is going on with them, and I know we can't possibly anticipate all scenarios, but are there indicators that people could be looking for that we might otherwise miss that would say, these kids are trying to speak loud and clear that they're not doing okay? What would people be looking for?
Oh, okay. So one of the other things I had done when I was doing education, I did a diploma in adult education. And so I came up with this funky hook. No one eats apples in BC.
Oh.
And all of that simply represents other kind of architectural pieces of trauma. So neurological and biological development, overreactive stress response, emotional regulation, attachment, identity development, behavioral regulation, and then cognitive and language. That's a lot to take on.
It is.
But if you think about behavior as communication, if kids are demonstrating some kind of elevated behavior, like they're violent, or they're throwing a tantrum, or they're shutting down, all of that behavior communicates that something else is going on. So if a child is raised with a lot of stress in their home environment, they have to find a way of kind of navigating it, trying to do it through surviving. And so behavior actually is triggered by emotion. And so you go, okay, well, if the child is throwing something, the emotion is probably easy to guess. It's probably anger.
Mm-hmm.
But if a child is raised in stress, the emotion will be triggered by their physiology. So John Gottman, who's a psychologist out of the University of Seattle, he would call it diffused physiological arousal. So their stress is held in their body because they have to stay safe.
Yes.
And so if they're holding that stress, when we talk to educators, the educator will say, I don't understand what happened. They went from 0 to 60 just like that. And when we say, well, the child's never at 0, the child is always at 40 or 50, all of a sudden it puts it into perspective. If the held stress of the child then manifests as an emotion, they may not know the way to slow emotion down. They may not have the regulation skills. So if you or I, for instance, get really stressed, well, we probably have learned some resilience skills, such as getting up, walking away, taking deep breaths, maybe doing some exercise, self-care. Well, if a child doesn't have a parent who can show them those skills or teach them different ways of accommodating that emotion, then it just sits in their body as raw feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And they may not even know the language of it. They just know that they're really wound up. And so, like, to your question, when you say, what would you say to people? Behavior is communication, and typically it's about the emotion and how the child is holding the stress, but also then how they interpret things around them. So if an adult says no, that word no could be interpreted in many ways. So if you say no to a video game and the child goes right into their aggressive behavior, no could mean that you're robbing them of their free will. Or it could be them feeling like you are always controlling. So they want to push back against that. Because the human mind is always interpreting what it means when other people are saying and doing things towards you. So some of the work that I do is trying to help adults learn the architecture of how stress impacts the child, and then coming up with strategies. How could you calm the stress response? Because the child, most adults would say, can you fix the behavior?
Yes.
And we'll say, well, the behavior is the fruit of the tree. We can swap out some apples, but they won't be organic if we just staple them on the end of the branch. Instead, you have to work with the root system. So if you start with attachment, healthy, safe, human connection, then the child will eventually learn, I don't have to fight for survival here. I trust you. Because two essential ingredients for any relationship are safety and trust. So if you can be that in a way that's predictable across time, the child will learn, hey, I don't have to protect myself because predictably you're not harmful to me. You're not invasive to me because you're the same today as yesterday, as last week, last month. So you start with attachment, but then you overlay things like lowering their stress response. And that can be done by coloring or cooking something together, baking cookies, or doing knitting, cross stitch, going for a walk, learning breathing, doing yoga poses. And by helping the child learn to regulate their physiology, you then have the ability to start over scaffolding their understanding of emotions. So there's a lot of social and emotional learning curriculum that are out there that schools will use. And so if a child can then learn skills of how to manage their own emotions, they're more likely to be more successful in school and then in their social relationships as they move forward.
I love it. What came to mind as you were describing is so many adults don't even fully understand what they're feeling. Right. And so I wondered about how often are we also needing to help the adults in their lives to also get grounded so they're not reacting and triggering further responses.
Right.
Yeah.
So the work that I do at the hospital dovetails so nicely with the work that I do with child and youth mental health and with school districts, because the human body, the human condition is consistent. So if you are perceiving all kinds of stressors in your life, well, your body will start showing it. And the same happens for me and every other person on the planet. And so part of the work is helping people to pay attention. So it's in the current theory, current vernacular, it's called mindfulness. Brene Brown has a funky way of calling it just paying attention. That's her boiled down version. I like that best. So it's paying attention. Where am I holding stress in my body? If I pay attention to my shoulders, how are they feeling? Or if I notice that I'm breathing a little bit more shallow, or if I am able to pay attention to what are the thoughts that are going through my mind as I'm now feeling wound up, that's the beginning of change. It's kind of that awareness of something's going on, and then becoming aware of the meaning that you're attaching to it. And then once you've got that, you're able to say, okay, what are things that I could do that would be healthy for me to step back or dial down my stress response or deal with my emotions in the moment. Self-care is a great thing that most adults don't think about. When I ask people, what do you do for self-care? They give me a blank look.
Yes.
And when you say, well, okay, what would you do for play? What do you do to have fun? Then it makes more sense to them. Kids do it intuitively. They play and they don't think about it. Adults get too serious and get too busy and they don't think about the healthy things that they can do, or they don't prioritize them and they don't make time.
It makes me think about how sometimes we need to meet people where they're at right now. But also in what you're describing, it's understanding what's gone on upstream. What's been happening that's led to this moment also that we may not fully understand in this moment. And we all can probably speak to that. If we've had a rough day, we come home, it takes nothing that might just set us off or that we feel overwhelmed, but it could have been something that's happened throughout the day. And so creating that awareness that you're talking about to help us be in the moment will help us then decide and inform us on how we need to respond.
Yes, absolutely.
Nice.
So, that's part of the counseling world that you and I both have spent time in, is trying to understand a bit of the history of the person. And so if you look at family systems, or if you ask questions about their trauma history, it gives you more of a context for why they might be triggered. Most people, in order to kind of navigate healthy and safe human relationships, they need trust and they need safety. And if they have those things, then they're more willing to be vulnerable. And vulnerability is the place that resilience begins.
I love it.
Because if you're going to try anything new, you have to be willing to fail at it. And that's very risky for a lot of adults and kids. So when you're saying to some child, here, let's try something that you're going to suck at first, well, if the stakes are too high, they'll fight you on it. Most infants, when they learn to walk, they'll pull themselves up on the table, they'll stand, they'll fight for their balance, and then they'll take a step and fall. But they immediately get up and try it again because there's no self-consciousness in there. They just want to walk. And once they've mastered that, then they run. So Brene Brown, her latest book is called Dare to Lead, and it's all about being willing to be vulnerable in your leadership, because it's a central piece of all human beings needing to be vulnerable.
So often we as parents really want to give our kids the impression that we've got our act together, that we got it all figured out. Yeah. And yet I often have thought about this in terms of building resilience in our kids, like you said, to model. And yet if we were to be more vulnerable in a healthy way with our kids, to say, this is something I'm struggling with, and this is how I'm working it through, for kids to see how their parents work through conflict, for example. Our daughter at one point said to us as a young adult, she said, I don't think you and Dad really taught us how to resolve conflict. And I thought that was fascinating. But you know what it was? She'd never seen us yell at each other, ever, growing up. So she'd heard stories from her friends that their parents would just yell at each other. So she thought we didn't show them how to do that. When in fact, I can think of many, many a days that we might have been in the middle of a conversation with a difference of opinion, but they saw us working it out. They just didn't realize it might have been a conflict.
Right.
So how can we model that so that our kids eventually get a bit of a roadmap on how to navigate hard things?
Yeah. Modeling is a funny thing. If you have two parents that think we don't want to scar the children, what they may do is migrate their hard conversation behind closed doors. And so the children don't get to see anything.
Yes.
And then you have the other parents that will stand in the kitchen and yell, or they'll escalate, but with no resolution. Well, that can be damaging to the child who's afraid that their world is coming apart. So in answering your question, the tricky part is it possible for the adults to learn how to de-escalate their own tension? So if it's a jugular issue like money or child rearing or some other thing that really matters to both adults, do they have the skills of being able to say, hey, I need a bit of time here. I'm getting too hot. I need to step away from the conversation. Give me 20 minutes, but I will be back. Well, that's a skill that not a lot of adults learn. Mm-hmm. And so then once you've got those skills, being able to say, hey, hun, as we're about to head into a conversation that's going to be heated, being able to say, can we do this in front of the children, but try to do it well so that children can see someone say, I think you've got a point. Or they're able to say, you know what, I was wrong. I apologize. Well, again, that takes vulnerability. And so if you've got two people that are stuck in a pride stance, they're not going to apologize. They'll simply double down on their opinion.
Yeah.
So part of it is, can you be honest and authentic with what's going on for you and then find a peaceable way through it?
Love it. Yes. Well, and we're already jumping a little bit into some of the things that are in your book. You wrote a book called Buoyancy, Building Resilient Kids, which immediately stood out for me when I saw that. And I just want for the listeners to hear this quote that's right on the very first chapter is in terms of buoyancy, what is it? Breathing is like an anchor in the midst of an emotional storm. The anchor won't make the storm go away, but it will hold you steady until the storm passes. By Russ Harris. I love that quote to start out the book.
Yeah, I love it too.
Which is why you used it, right? Yeah.
Which is why I used it. Yeah.
Can you tell the listeners, what was it about this book that inspired you to put it to paper and share it with others?
So when I was growing up, I learned that I had an uncle. His name was Bill. I'd never met him. He died before I was born. So this was my mother's younger brother. And he ended up passing away because he drowned. He didn't know how to swim, and it's just some circumstances. And so I think that drove my mom to make sure that I knew how to swim. And so when I was young enough to be put into classes, we learned with one of our little community educators who were teaching swimming lessons at the time. The first thing they taught us was something called drown proofing, which was a very simple way of learning to breathe in such a way that when you fill your lungs, if you hold it, it actually makes you more buoyant. It keeps you up above the waterline long enough that either someone can come and help you or you can fight your way back over to the edge of the pool. And so the idea of the human breath ties into that concept of buoyancy. So I thought about the title of being unsinkable. So the idea of not remaining underwater, but I like the idea of popping back up better. And I like the idea of breathing as it relates to that. So the human breath, as you know, if you take a short breath in, let's say it takes you 2 to 3 seconds in, but you exhale even more slowly, it takes you 4 to 5 seconds. What you're doing is you're activating your parasympathetic nervous system, which calms the whole physiology. So breathing, we know, actually really matters to helping people become more calm. So what I did was I took the concept of breathe, and being the adult educator, I made it a little acronym.
Beautiful.
And then I talked about what are some of the things that would help children remain buoyant or unsinkable. They're all skills, they're elements that relate to the word breathe. So if you think about bravery, that's the ability to press into hard things, even though you've got fear. Well, resilience is, do you know how to bounce back up when you've been knocked down? If you've got the E, it's endurance. So I tell the story about Ernest Shackleton and the fact that his ship was called the Endurance. And 2 years out at sea in the Antarctic when no one was going to come rescue them. And so how were they able to endure that process? Acceptance is, well, when bad things happen, how do you make peace with them? Like, how can you actually learn to accept that something's happened and still be able to get up? Because some things are hard in life. Tenacity is the idea of being able to really press on in a common direction of something important. And I tell a story about Dick and Rick Hoyt. These are incredible story about a father and a son who did 1,130 endurance events over a 30-year career. His son had cerebral palsy. And so the father had to do all of the work.
Yeah.
And that's just an incredible story of tenacity. Hope, I talk about Terry Fox, the idea of, do you have something that is worth holding on to, that creates a sense of lift? It's almost like faith. It's a belief in something beyond. And then I tell a story for excellence. Excellence is not perfection, that unattainable standard. Excellence is, did you do your best today? Did you pursue something better than you did yesterday? And so, like most kids like stories. And so I told a story about a person who embodied each one of those letters. So bravery, resilience, endurance, etc. And then I started to form it into questions. How could you cheer those things on for children? Because if you don't show a child how to do something, well, then you're letting them fumble their way in the dark. And most kids, when facing something that is daunting, they won't choose bravery. They won't pursue it and press through it.
True.
Instead, a lot of kids will back off and say, I can't. And then they get stuck. So it's up to the adults, either the parents or the educators of these of little kids, to kind of frame what is the concept and how do you pursue it and what would that look like? And I did all of that in 2020. COVID was good for something.
It was very good for that.
Yeah.
Well, and I love that each story is attached to each of those letters of breathe. And like you said, not only kids, but I think adults really relate a lot to stories. And through those examples, they're pretty extreme examples of what people have been through and survived. And sometimes that can put into perspective what I might be dealing with today and how hard this might be feeling. So I love the acronym. You've got quite a few beautiful tools in here for people to utilize. And can you speak to some of the exercises as well? Maybe, why you designed it the way you did, of some of the exercise sheets, the building, breaking, passive, active. Would you mind just speaking to that a little bit?
Oh, sure. There's a couple of ways of trying to help children understand each of the concepts. So I use the word test. Like if you're having to face a test, it induces all kinds of things in your body, in your mind. And so TEST is another acronym, and it's designed for memory ease. The idea of facing a trial. Well, a trial may mean that you need bravery, or it may mean that you need tenacity or acceptance. So the question for an adult asking a child is to be able to say, well, what's the hard thing? Like, what's the trial that you're facing? And you can enter into conversations about that, because little people, kids, adolescents, even adults, could say the hard thing for me is that I have to give a public speech. I have to write a paper. I have an exam coming up. I have a job interview. If that's a trial, helping children to then pay attention, that's the mindfulness concept, paying attention to what's going on in their body. So the TEST is, what is the trial? What are the emotions? What are the sensations that you're feeling in your body? And then what are your thoughts? So under the emotions, if kids don't know the difference between being irritated and angry, anger is a family of emotions with a degree of intensity. And so on the shallow end, you could say I'm irritated or I'm frustrated, or you could at the deeper end of the pool say I am furious. Like, oh, okay, well, part of the teaching children is to be able to say to them, hey, I notice it looks like something's going on. What's up? Now, if they have emotional language, they could say, I'm really frustrated at. But if they don't, an adult could say, you look frustrated. Is that what's going on? So it's cueing and giving them language for what is the emotional space they're in facing their trial. You can then say, where do you feel that in your body? Like I said, John Gottman would say, sometimes it's just raw feelings and children just don't have the language for it. But if I say, where do you hold your stress? Most people would say, oh, it's my back. My back goes out, or I get a headache, or my shoulders get tight. So helping children to learn, what is it that I'm feeling in my body on a physiological level? That's part of the exercise of learning what goes on for me when I need bravery or when I'm scared, or what goes on for me when I need tenacity because I'm tired. And then the last one, thoughts. I talk about the differentiation between critical comments and buoyant beliefs. So every one of us, when we grow up, we have a critic, and it's alive and well. And the moment you think that you're going to try something new in vulnerability, the critic will say, who do you think you are? And it will try to talk you out of doing that hard thing. So the buoyant belief is to be able to say, wait, I need bravery, or I need tenacity, or I need something. So what would I tell myself that would actually be an encouraging statement? So if I could say, oh, just one more step, or I just have to just give it your best, or just breathe. All of those things are for information. So the child can learn in their head, what is the trial, the emotions, the sensation, and the thoughts that are going on in my head. And then when you talk about the active responding, from Shelley Gable, she's a psychologist in the US who came up with an active constructive responding model. And I simply enhanced on it by giving different ideas of how you could use the model. So the idea is there are things that you could passively do to be destructive. Instead of building buoyancy, you're doing the opposite. Passively, you could sit on your hands and do nothing. You could also actively destroy your bravery through your critical comments. I'm such an idiot. I can't do this. I'm a loser. I will never be able to. And so helping kids to learn that they can both actively and passively build their buoyancy is where I'm trying to get the model to actually work. So a passive build towards bravery could be doing mental rehearsal of if you have to do a public speech. It could be imagining being in the room. It could be practicing, in your head towards other people, or imagining the people in the audience. Actively could be going to the arena or the room that you be in anyways, and getting a feel for what does it actually look like, feel like. Doing a public speech in front of your parents is a way of actively building your bravery. And so simply a model and then a bunch of ideas of how to enhance using some of those ideas. That's where I was trying to make it more usable for the adults that would read the books.
Well, I'm sure it's going to help a lot of adults too. What really stands out for me, and I often teach people this myself as well, we often just trust that first negative thought. Mm-hmm. And we seldom spend that kind of time understanding and reflecting on that other side, that more helpful thought.
Yeah.
And when you point that out to people, they're often surprised when they actually sit down and take the time to think about it logically. How else could they be thinking about that?
Yeah.
They're often surprised by how much that can change the intensity of it.
Yeah.
And some of this, what we're talking about, is cognitive behavior therapy as well, right?
Yeah.
And what you're doing is building a toolkit there in this book. I love it because if parents practice this with their kids, you're going to be setting them up to be adults who can then be much more buoyant through many circumstances later. And that is our job as parents, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So the point, I guess, was to try to build a bit of a toolkit because most adults will do the best they can with what they know and what they've used in the past. So if you can give parents or educators or the caring adults a few other tips and tricks, well, maybe they try them and maybe they like them. And if they like them, they'll use them again. Maybe they'll apply them in their own life. But the point is to try to give people tools for change, because change is really what we're after. Is we're trying to get people to move towards a better version of themselves, if we can.
Mm-hmm.
So I also like what you said. People pay attention to their first negative thought, and it kind of becomes that self-fulfilling prophecy. If I have to do a public speech using that example, and I keep saying to myself, oh, I'm going to do terrible, I'm going to do terrible, I'm going to do terrible. Well, when I get up, my physiology is going to be so stressed that my head won't be able to wrestle with the ideas I'm trying to communicate, and I will most likely struggle. And then once I'm finished with red face, feeling shame, I'll walk away and go, oh, I was terrible. And it becomes that self-reinforcing pattern. So part of the work is to be able to say, wait, I can take baby steps.
Yeah.
Little steps at a time. Yeah.
Now, you've also spoken and referred here just now to the curriculum that you also have created that teachers could implement. What grades would you say that would be geared towards?
Well, when I first built it, I was thinking that kindergarten kids are probably a bit young for it. But if you went from 3 to 6, 3 to 8, most kids can hold on to the ideas that we're talking about. So when you use the idea of tenacity, that is a big word for a kindergartner.
Right.
But most grade eights would be able to say, I understand what tenacity is, sticking with it and doing the best you can towards a perceived goal.
Yeah. Here's a question that's coming to mind because I know a lot of teachers are feeling really taxed right now. And the social, emotional pieces that they're needing to navigate. And yet I wonder, in this program that you're offering, if we could address this in part of the curriculum, how much would we then be helping kids learn? It's kind of like the chicken and the egg. If we can help them have more skills to be more socially, emotionally aware, how might that then help them academically in their day?
Yeah. So in the work that I do with the province, Child and Youth Mental Health, and the Ministry of Children and Families and different school districts, it is a big issue where educators spend the first part of the school year trying to get the harder to manage children to get a little bit more calm. And so quite often they integrate pre-existing social emotional learning curriculums. And if they're able to integrate some of the ideas on themselves, they become more calm as an educator. And that calmness pervades the classroom. Like if you have an adult who's really stressed, they're going to use harsher language. They might be more shrill. And the little antennas of the kids in the classroom are going to pick up on that tension. And they then can start showing some of their tension. So if an adult learns to calm themselves and keep themselves in a more regulated state, they've actually got more resources to use with the kids they work with. Then if they can teach the children, like there's a curriculum right now called Zones of Regulation. It's on the market. And they use a color system to begin introducing emotions. The optimal color is green and the non-optimal color is red. And so if little Johnny is yellow, the teacher, if they've done their work, can say, hey, Johnny, you look like you're yellow right now. What's it going to take to become green? And then they can go and practice some of those behaviors or skills, such as deep breathing or having a calming box or a sensory kind of kit where they can calm themselves. The point is not that the adult calms the child, but that the adult teaches the child how to calm themselves. That would be the ideal. And so to your question, if a teacher does a good job of that, their work gets easier.
Yeah.
Because everybody's more calm.
Well, I love that you've done that piece to this because the book parents could pick up and they could be talking through this and rereading it with their kids or picking a part of it and just practicing that for a period of time. You don't have to just sit down and read the whole book and expect to get it, but to take some of these tools and carve out a bit of time each week to sit with your kids and to work through it and maybe demonstrate it also as an adult, how you might be practicing that as well. And I think of it as a practice. We can't just read something and get it right away because our bodies are not meant to just take on something new and do that automatically.
Right. Yeah, it needs muscle memory.
Yeah.
So I had some test pilots as I was doing this. I offered it to some of my clinician friends that have small kids, and they tried out the concepts, and overwhelmingly they came back and they said, this stuff works. I'm like, well, of course, because it's human physiology and it's how we think about things. And it's also giving them a little bit of tools for their toolkit.
And to me, that's what this is all about. Like I often will say to kids when they come into counseling, did anybody give you a manual on how to deal with this particular issue? Like, did they say, turn to page 83 and little Johnny, this is how you handle it? And they'll go, no, I didn't get one. Well, I said, I didn't either. So it's okay that you don't know yet. And to be patient. And I also like what you said about, for example, in the school to say, what do you need to do to get to green? Because I know even just through human services, human work that I do, but also through coaching, when people are given an option to tap into what they know, if they have the tools, they can then make a choice rather than somebody say, go practice this. We're going to be less likely to want to do it. But if you give the kids the toolkit and then say, which of those do you think you might want to use right now? That sometimes will get you a customer willing to try that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm very happy to be here with you talking about these ideas because I think they are really important. The books, they're on Amazon. You can find them. And my sense is that if people are interested, they'll look them up. And if not, then that's okay. You have a lot of good material on your podcast. I've listened to several of them. I'm quite impressed. Well done.
Well, thank you. I'm so grateful for people like yourself willing to share your knowledge, your expertise around this, because you've been doing a lot of work on this for a long time. So This is not just something you're pulling out of your hat. You've tried it. You've been implementing it with many people over the years. And so to me, I put a lot of credibility in what you're teaching in this book. I love it when it's easy to read. There's a lot of self-help books out there, and people can get a little bit overwhelmed by that. But I love that you're targeting for children and kids, because to me, we're creating a healthier society if we can give our kids what they need. And I had a cool moment just this week where I had a young lady that I worked with when she was 9 for anxiety, had a hard time going to school. The parents just didn't know how to help her. We worked together at different points, at different stages. And then she was at 13. She would come back for a little bit more work. Well, she's now in her second year university. And I just feel so privileged. Even though she's done well, she's thriving, she's going to school, found a career she's going to enjoy. But I feel so honored that she'd come back as an adult, still using some of the language that I would have taught her when she was 9. And it's just because I had that ability to teach it to her that she saw it, she practiced it over the years, but she now knows and can name it when she's doing the stinky thinking, which I always called it.
That is fantastic. What a great story.
It's so cool. And I just want to encourage the listeners out there that when we give our kids these tools, they do grow up to be adults, and they're still maybe going to struggle with anxiety. They may get triggered, as we all might, but it's about, they know where to go to get help. They know that they don't have to just do it on their own. To me, that's also a gift, to have people see you, Kirk, and to get that help they need means that we don't have to do it all on our own, that we can seek out and get books like you've written, go see someone like yourself, tap into the resources that can maybe teach the kids what we can't. Because we also know that our kids don't always want to listen to us as parents. That's a guarantee, right?
That is guaranteed.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that you would spend a little bit of time sharing what you've been up to.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Kirk. One of the very exciting aspects of hosting this podcast is not only in hearing the individual stories, but also discovering new perspectives on how we can cultivate resilience. I believe it's extremely important to give our children the tools to build resilience, which helps them become better equipped to navigate adversity in their lives. Like anything, however, that is new and unfamiliar, we need to practice with these skills we learn. I appreciate that in this conversation with Dr. Austin, we landed on vulnerability and the importance of modeling this for our children. It is about being human and identifying what it means to have big emotions, learning how we deal with these emotions, having options to consider in the moment, and designing specific actionable strategies for dealing with sometimes hard things. Like any toolkit, we don't use the same tool for all jobs. We need to have options of the tools in our toolkit. Just to review Dr. Austin's acronym for growing buoyancy, we are invited to think of the word breathe. B for bravery, which is the attitude and actions we can use when we press into hard things. Resilience is about learning to bounce back from adversity. E is for endurance, which is the attitude or actions related to holding on despite difficult circumstances. A is for acceptance, and this is about making peace with these circumstances. T is for tenacity, which is the ability to stick with it. And H is for hope, which means we're going to expect the best despite the current adversities. And E represents excellence, our attitude and actions that are related to doing our very best. Working with children and youth over the years, I have often referred to the fact that we did not get a manual on how to deal with all of the different adversities in life. Wouldn't it be great if we could just turn to page 82 in a certain situation and we would have a customized strategy on how to exactly deal with that situation today? Although Dr. Austin's book isn't a manual specifically designed for you personally, I think it could provide further tools for your toolbox. As we think of the word resilience, I imagine it is a destination we would like to arrive at. Well, I'm learning it's more of a practice that comes with mindful decisions in choosing how we will respond to situations, the narrative we use, and the tools we acquire along the way. The more we practice, the better we get at responding in a more resilient way. As we wrap up this episode, I'm wondering what tools you have in your toolbox for growing resilience, and how are you doing at developing your buoyant beliefs? Thank you for listening to this episode of A Resilience Project. We would not be doing this podcast without you. If you or someone you know has an inspirational story or is helping to build resilience in their community, please email me at cindy@aresilienceproject.com. In fact, email me either way. I would love to hear from you. My hope is to feature an episode periodically on your letters of resilience. I'm very interested in hearing your story of how you have tackled hard things and what worked for you. With your permission, I hope to share some of these stories along the way with our listeners. Also, check out my website, aresilienceproject.com, to learn more about our amazing guests. Your presence here is important because together we are cultivating a village of resilient individuals. You are creating a space for their stories to be shared and a sacred space for learning to occur. I also have a favor. I would love for you to go to your preferred podcast platform, rate and review the podcast so that we will know how we're doing. I also would like to express my gratitude to the amazing team of volunteers that have jumped on board to support this project. You will find each of those beautiful people on my website on the team page. As you go about this week, I invite you to think about one way that you can continue to grow your resilient muscle. What is one thing you can start with today? See you next week.
Ever find yourself waiting endlessly at a big box pharmacy, feeling like just another number? At Tablet Pharmacy, they provide the personalized service you deserve. They offer free delivery and blister packaging options to make managing your medications easier than ever. Check their competitive prices online at tabletpharmacy.ca